Hi, my name is Megan Wanacott, and I'm going to review some concepts and terms you may want to be familiar with before you jump into literacy assessment, intervention, and remediation. There are three types of assessments. We have a literacy assessment, language assessment, and diagnostic test. A reading assessment is the process by which an educator can gather data to determine a student's strength and weakness in regards to a particular reading concept. This can be done in one of two ways: informal or formal assessment. A formal assessment can take the form of a summative assessment that occurs at the end of a reading unit that covers mastery of that particular concept taught. Or it can be an informal data collection. This could be a teacher's daily reading behavior observation of certain students. The teacher can use both sets of data to determine a student's strength and weakness when it comes to reading. This data can also help educators understand what students may need intense intervention and remediation, or which could just simply need some extension or extra time for practice. This can also help students understand that some assessments are there not to particularly gauge growth, but to determine areas to focus on. A literacy specialist role would be help to make sure that these assessments are valid and that teachers understand what data can be taken from it and how to use that data. Very similar to a reading assessment is a diagnostic test. A diagnostic test is a standardized test that's given once a year for the express purpose of identifying a student's area of strengths and weakness. This is only given at the beginning of the year, and instead of covering one or a few topics, it covers every grade level strand. An example of a test that I've given out of a diagnostic is NWEA. The whole purpose of this test is to cover every single Common Core state standard strand that the sixth graders will encounter throughout their year. Then it allows the teachers to understand which strands they need to spend more time on teaching. So it's a way to inform their instruction, meaning if students have 90% or more mastery on a strand, you probably don't need to spend too much time going over it. You can focus your attention on other strands that there was much less mastery on. A diagnostic test is another great way to identify what students need intervention and which need remediation. A literacy specialist should be able to complete a data dig of this diagnostic test and help teachers understand what students should be in which title groups, intervention groups, or remediation groups. Students should know this is a locator test. It does not measure growth. It identifies areas of strength and weakness. The last type of test we're going to be talking about is a language assessment. This gauges the student's grasp of the different parts of language, such as sound phrase recognition, sound phrase reproduction, vocabulary comprehension, and storytelling. It is the base of reading skills. You must have this mastered before you move on to other crucial reading skills that will assist students further on their life. So this is the base of their reading. Dibbles and maze are two examples of this type of assessment. Often they are labeled as oral reading, however, they have context-based vocabulary, they have retelling, phonics, word choice, and comprehension. These truly identify intervention groups. Students who have a specific deficit in language cannot move on to application and comprehension of grade level text and be able to understand the purpose for these texts that they're reading. Therefore, students need to be put into small groups, which is where a literacy specialist can come in. They'll be able to pull students out and work on the particular language area that they have been identified as struggling with. They could also help the general education teacher incorporate some skills into their daily instruction that might help them with these skills as well. Students must once again realize this is the base of their reading, so they must focus on getting the language skills where it needs to be. We've talked a lot about remediation and intervention, so let's discuss what those two terms mean. Remediation is kind of like a teaching again moment. This is something the teacher should do without thought, to be perfectly honest. The teacher must recognize during or immediately after initial instruction that the majority of their class did not grasp the concept being taught. Therefore, either immediately after or in the next lesson, they review it in a different form that will help with comprehension and mastery. That will allow for maximum retention. I frequently use Kahoot as a remediation form. What this is an online game that can have the students review this concept, apply the concept, discuss the concept in small groups, large groups, or partners, which allows for all different learning styles to be met and students to receive that retention. It is reteaching to alleviate confusion and allow students to master the concept and hopefully not determine any more intervention or remediation groups. Literacy specialists have a particular role in remediation because their job is to help the teachers understand what activities or methods could be used as remediation. It's not a widely known concept, so it's something that the literacy specialist should be able to assist with. Students probably won't hear the term remediation. They'll hear reteach. They need to understand it's the same thing, but it's not teaching a new concept. It's just learning it again in a different way to hopefully help with that retention. Intervention is very different. Intervention is when it is a research-based, separate from general education, small group instructional approach that can be targeted to specific students and their specific deficits. This will help the reader or writer understand the concept they particularly struggle with. It may not be the concept the class is working on, but their particular area of need. The approach is very closely monitored to make sure it's effective. In my classroom, I use quite a bit of small group targeted learning groups during centers where I find students through either the diagnostic, reading, or language assessment who have similar areas of need. I use resources from our curriculum that focus on that area of need, and I teach it in a small group. And I continue to do this in different forms, games, hands-on activities, reading, partner groups, various times in different ways to make sure that they are grasping the concept. Knowing what intervention is truly helps the educator understand what approach is appropriate for certain students. The reading specialist role is very, very, very involved in an intervention. They are there to support the general education teacher by giving them the resources for these small groups, pulling out groups, perhaps even co-teaching classes, and being the expert on any intervention that could help those students in those particular strands. Students will hear the term intervention. They'll know they're being pulled to work on a different skill. However, they need to know it's not a negative thing. It's simply a refocusing on an area of need. The last concept we're going to talk about is progress monitoring. This is a short systematic test that is given periodically, either bi-monthly or monthly, to see if the intervention instructional approaches that are being used are effective in allowing students to reach mastery. One example of those would be something that we use in our district. It is called Illuminate Ed. It is a warehouse full of standard-based passages with questions and writing prompts. The title teachers and interventionists and myself can find the prompt, passage, and questions that match the strand that's being worked on in intervention groups, make a quick couple of tests, I don't want to say tests, but check-ins, as you will, to see if students can reach 90% or higher of mastery. This shows that the intervention that is being applied is useful and that the students are actually gaining the comprehension skill. The literacy specialist role here is very, very involved again. They should be in charge of creating, keeping track of the data, and presenting these progress monitoring check-ins to the whole staff so everybody understands what is effective and what is working. Students should know exactly what progress monitoring is. They need to understand what it is and why they're doing it so it's meaningful. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, always feel free to talk to your district's leading literacy specialist or principal.